Hello, and thank you for joining me for part 6 of our series on pranayama. Here we are going to apply an idea that I picked up from one of my favorite authors, Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He wrote a book. He's written a lot of books, but the book that I'd like to reference is called Anti-Fragile. Okay? He coined the term anti-fragile because he said there wasn't a word in the English language that really captured what is the opposite of fragile. If you ask what's the opposite of fragile, someone might use a word like robust. But that's not really the opposite, it's neutral. Let me explain. If I take a wine glass and I drop it, it shatters because it's fragile. If I take a brick and drop it, it survives the fall because it's robust. Okay? But surviving change, rather than being shattered by change, aren't opposites. Survival is neutral. The opposite of being destroyed is being created. And so Nicholas Taleb, when he wrote the book Anti-Fragile, he was addressing systems, phenomena that don't just survive change, but thrive, that need change to grow. And of course, one of the most obvious winners in that category is life itself. You throw a meteor at the earth and wipe out the dinosaurs, and we bounce back with mammals. If you want your skeleton to be strong, you have to stress it. Okay? Without stress, bones become weak and become chalky and shatter. Okay? So life is an example of a system that needs to be pushed, it needs to be challenged, that needs to be stressed. And with the stress, the right amount, the system becomes stronger, more resilient. So he coined the term anti-fragile, and his book really addresses that. One of the key elements that I want to draw from that book that I now apply to my pranayama, and that is his discussion of optionality. And of course, from his background in trading, it makes sense that he would use this language, optionality. And he's a big advocate for maintaining options. So let's take a look at this for just a moment. One way to measure the aging process is our body's loss of options. So let's take a look at the aging process in terms of this lens of optionality. Let's take a look starting with the heart. You would think heart that has a very steady rhythm is healthier than a heart that has a chaotic rhythm. And I'm talking about the rhythm at which it speeds up and slows down beating. Okay? But the opposite is actually true. Okay? If your heart has one way of beating, that's not a good sign. Usually they'll put you into ICU. Okay? If you look at a young kid's heart, what is it doing? It's chaotic. The heart is beating faster, it's beating slower, and it's constantly changing, and you can't predict the rhythm of the heartbeat in 3 beats from now accurately. Okay? It's chaotic. You can't predict the future. Whereas an 80-year-old in ICU, if I watch the heart beating for a few minutes, I can tell you how it's going to beat a few minutes from now, okay? With a reasonable chance of being correct. Okay? Let's look at the endocrine system. How many strong emotions does a 2-year-old go through in 10 minutes? And you can see that they have this roller coaster of a ride with the endocrine system. Now compare that to someone that's 45 years old, and you'll see that the highs aren't as high, usually the lows aren't as low, it's smoothed out a little bit, but also they can go for hours in the same emotional state. Okay? Now roll the clock forward and visit a nursing home. And there you'll find people that are in the same emotional state 24/7. So one way to think about this is a 2-year-old has more options available to them in terms of how they meet any moment with their emotional response. A 75-year-old may be down to one emotion, and they meet everything with the same emotion. Okay? I met a woman, and she seemed to have one emotion, and it was bitterness. It was etched into her face through years of contraction, all the pucker lines of disapproval around her mouth. And it didn't matter what happened, she met it with the same one-tone response. She was down to one emotion. So as we age, we lose the volatility of emotions, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but also the optionality diminishes. One study looked at what is a simple way to teach healthcare workers a way to observe a patient and based on observations be able to estimate what their longevity is. What is their life expectancy, just based on some observations. And so they looked at a variety of different things to see what is the easiest, simplest way to assess someone. And what they found was watching how they get down on the floor and how they get back up. How many options do they have? How many different ways can they get down and get back up again? Okay. Do they need to use both hands? Okay. Or can they get up and get down without using their hands? They had this little checklist, and based on this checklist they were able to estimate what someone's life expectancy is with a fair degree of accuracy. How many ways can a 2-year-old get up or get down on the floor? And again, you'll see that a 2-year-old doesn't have one way of doing anything. They have thousands of different ways of doing anything. Okay? So this is this idea of optionality. Okay? So when we apply this idea to our breath work, to breathing practice, we get some interesting results. It helps us to understand the purpose of the pranayama. When I was young, I thought that because my teacher taught me to breathe in for 4 and out for 4, to breathe smoothly, floating at the top, floating at the bottom, to begin slowing the breath down, breathing in for 6 and out for 6, in for 12, out for 12, that I began to make the assumption that because that's what we practiced, that was what we should strive for, that was the best way of breathing, that this is a good way, that this way of breathing is better than this way of breathing, which is a natural tendency, is to assume what we practice must be better than the alternative. Why else would we practice it? When you approach it through the idea of optionality, it gives you a different focus. When I worked at Seton Hospital in the cardiac rehab program, I helped them to create a yoga program for cardiac patients. And one of the first things I noticed was that my cardiac patients that I was working with had very limited ways of breathing. One gentleman might be able to breathe in for 3 and out for 4. Another one might breathe in for 4 and out for 3. When I asked them to make even the smallest adjustment to their breathing pattern, within a matter of 30 seconds, I could see anxiety coming up. Okay? When they tried to change the way they were breathing, they would have a anxiety response. And so I had to get them back to breathing the way that they were most comfortable with breathing. But it did kind of make sense when you think about it, optionality. How many different ways can I breathe in and out? Okay. Almost infinite. The reason is I've been practicing pranayama. So the practice is about increasing optionality. Okay. Now the good news is these cardiac patients within 2 years could breathe in for 4 and out for 4, in for 4 and out for 8, in for 4, hold for 16, breathe out for 8. They could do breath of fire, they could do alternate nostril breath. So within 2 years, I helped them to create more options for their breathing. So the best way to think about this in aging is that we are born with more options. Over time we lose them, And when you're down to one option, you are increasingly more vulnerable, because if you lose that last option for breathing or for heartbeat or anything else, the endocrine system, when you lose those options, we become more vulnerable. So for me, the yoga practice isn't about saying that this way I'm practicing breathing is the best way. It's another option. The more options you have, the more interesting things become, okay? And the healthier you become. So for instance, I can breathe in for 4, hold for 16, breathe out for 8. I could breathe in for 4, hold for 32, breathe out for 8. I could breathe in for 16, breathe out for 8, and hold for 4. I can change that rhythm in almost an infinite number of ways, and, this is the important part, be absolutely comfortable breathing in an unorthodox way. So for instance, I'll try a 8, 4, 2, 4. Hold. Breathe out. Hold. So you can see that I was able to adapt a rhythm of breathing without any prior thought and without any effort. That comes from years of deliberately learning how to breathe in a new, different way. Okay? I can also change the transition. I can also change the ratios. I can breathe into different parts of my body comfortably. I can breathe into the back or the belly. Or I can breathe into the shoulders and then the back and then the belly. So when you're practicing pranayama, let go of this idea that there's a right way to breathe, and instead focus on increasing optionality. Every new pranayama is a new option, and as you practice it and become comfortable with it, something interesting happens. When I practice detached observation, when I let go of control, I allow my body to breathe the way it wants to breathe, and I don't judge and I don't interfere, I don't control, my breath becomes incredibly chaotic. I might breathe really, really shallow and then take 3 deep breaths and then float for 20 seconds without breathing at all. And one breath may move into the upper back a little bit more, another breath move into the belly. And as I thought about this and compared it to what I saw with most of my students that were new to pranayama or older or sick, and when they practiced detached observation, their body breathed one way, because that was the only way it was comfortable breathing. The reason my body is chaotic is because at any given moment, there's thousands of different ways it could choose to breathe to meet the needs of this particular moment. Okay? And the body has all kinds of needs, like digestion. The diaphragm pushing down into the abdominal cavity as you breathe is going to help move food through the GI tract. The balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system responds to the ratio of the inhale and the exhale. All of these different factors are coming into play. The amount of stress, anxiety, calmness, what's going on outside of me, what's going on inside of me, whether I had a big meal for lunch. All of these different things create a unique moment. And my body has almost an infinite number of different ways to respond to that moment with breath. So I would like to share with you this idea that when we're practicing pranayama, we're increasing optionality. Then, when we practice detached observation, my favorite breathing pattern of all, we're making use of those options without any effort. And you begin to notice how your body begins to breathe with a greater sense of novelty. Thank you for sharing this discussion on applying the principles of anti-fragility in especially the idea of optionality and how that can be used to make sense of our pranayama work. I hope you have a wonderful week and look forward to seeing you soon. Namaste.